I'm investigative journalist Molly Barrows. For years, I've covered the stories that made headlines in Northwest Florida and all along the Gulf Coast. Murders, missing persons, and mysteries of all kinds. These cases are far from over for many victims because the full story has yet to surface. Join me for Gulf Coast Confidential, where I dive into the saltier side of the South and expose the lies, greed, and corruption that often weighs down the truth. It's time to turn the tide and get a shot at justice. Hey y'all, I'm Molly Barrows, and welcome to the Gulf Coast Confidential podcast, where we cover some of the most scandalous crimes and cases that bubble up in Northwest Florida and beyond. Joining me per usual to talk about these What the Feezy cases is Pam Hill, pharmacist, advocate for victims extraordinaire. She's experienced violent crime in her own family, and we appreciate her sharing her experiences with us and weighing in. And in this episode, we're going to rely a lot on Pam's medical training and her background as a pharmacist. And we're also going to be talking a lot about this right here. What is this, you may ask? For those who are watching and listening, this is just a report from the Florida Department of Health. Basically, it's an emergency order suspending the license of Dr. Thomas Shaknovsky. And if you listen to one of our previous episodes about Dr. Thomas Shaknovsky, then you'll know that he is the surgeon who apparently, I don't know if he just didn't know where it was, but we're going to give you all the details. He removed a man's liver instead of his spleen, basically killing him right there on the operating table. And this happened in Destin, Florida on August 21st. So the state of Florida has now revoked Dr. Shaknovsky's license, and we're going to talk all about the details that they gave in this report as to why they did it. So this episode is called Surgeon Loses License After Removing Man's Liver Instead of Spleen. Dr. Thomas Shaknovsky blames mistake on migrating organ. And y'all, this isn't even the first time. This is the second time he has operated and removed the wrong body part. And we're hearing that there are other complaints. Now, only those two cases are mentioned in this order right here. But from what I understand, there are other people that have concerns now about undergoing procedures that he performed as well. So we'll see what shakes loose from that as we continue. But for now, we're going to talk all about this, Pam. And this is another homegrown case here in Northwest Florida.
Right.
Look out, y'all.
Yep. Less than 90 miles away. And this is an emergency suspension here. It's a case it's like, you ain't seen nothing like this before, and it's like a hold my root beer or hold this.
It's so unbelievable. I mean, you just think it's like, you take your car to a mechanic, you expect them to know the front end from the back end, the headlight from the engine, the brake from the gas. These seem to be the basics. I'm certainly no expert on a car. I'm certainly no expert on my body, but I know how to Google stuff, and just this fact that he just completely, not once but twice, removed the wrong organ. And in this case, he removed this man's liver. Y'all, you can't live without your liver, I mean, it just, there's and you can pronounce it much better than I can, but basically there's a major vein, the largest vein in your body, connects from your heart to your liver. And that's what he cut. Blindly cutting into this man's body and took it out. So anyway, that's a little teaser. We're going to start at the beginning, though, with this report. So we're going to walk you through why the state of Florida decided that his license needed this emergency suspension.
Right. Well, and let's just talk about something before we get into this. We have physicians, we have surgeons, we have the surgery team, we have the people that are supportive in a surgery and stuff. 99% of the folks that do surgery would never, ever, ever this happen. This is such an egregious error and such an obvious error that it's just like with Ben Brown. Sometimes you have people that are operating in a demigod syndrome, like I'm God, don't question me type of thing. And in healthcare, that happens sometimes to where people around you just tremble and shake because it's just like with Ben Brown. I've created this miserable environment for my employees. I'm going to stay mad. I'm going to stay angry because it'll keep you at arm's length away.
And I don't want anybody questioning me.
Because I'll tell you how smart I am when I need you to know.
And how charming I am and how it's your body's fault and not my fault.
Right. And so at a certain point, I've seen this, like I tell you this all the time. I'm like, the world's changing because we are questioning things. We are pushing back.
And there are outlets, there's social media, there are greater avenues to make your case heard.
Right. And there are things that are happening in healthcare and in law and stuff that are leaning more toward the advocacy for the patient or the defendant or the plaintiff or the person. We've just taken in so much. But this hostile environment where you walk in and you make everything miserable, like I said on that last case we talked about, if somebody creates all that misery and chaos in your life, don't walk away, run away. That person's not good for you mentally, spiritually, emotionally, physically, professionally.
Absolutely. That's definitely an important takeaway.
Yeah, I don't stay around that. When I see people acting like that, I'm like, bye, deuces. I can't do this.
Yes. Well, it seems in this situation, this operating room staff didn't really have a choice necessarily. He's the doctor assigned to this. And those of you who may not be familiar, the state began investigating this 42-year-old surgeon, Thomas Shaknovsky, after the death of 70-year-old Bill Bryan. He's from Muscle Shoals, Alabama. Like I mentioned earlier, he died on the operating table at Ascension Sacred Heart Emerald Coast in Miramar Beach. That's just over the border from Destin, if you will. It's pretty close, a hop, skip, and a jump, like 10 miles away. He is a Destin doctor. Dr. Shaknovsky, his address is in Destin. So if you're familiar with that part of the state, then it's about an hour east of Pensacola. In fact, I went to Niceville High School, which is right in that same area. So I grew up, watching Destin become the mega tourist development attraction that it is now. But when I first moved over there, I'm dating myself, y'all. But it was not much. I mean, it was just a sleepy little fishing village. There was a bar called the Green Knight. There was this giant Green Knight that, was out on 98. And then there was nothing beyond that really except a little restaurant called Fuddpuckers. And now it's just wall-to-wall condos and a busy place and a happening place. And the money that's out there, you've got celebrities that live out there, vacation there. So this is the environment that Dr. Shaknovsky is practicing in. This is, in fact, I looked up his house on Google because I looked up the address that's even provided here on the FDOH, and it turned out to be his home address as well as one of his addresses was a home address. I think this one may actually be his medical office. But either way, he has an enormous mansion on the water. As he should. I mean, you would expect to get paid if you're getting paid to do, I guess, a good job.
Right.
In this situation, it seems like that certainly is questionable. I would say that Bill Bryan's widow, Beverly, and her attorney don't think that are very fond of the work that he has done. She's devastated, of course.
No doubt.
And so many questions because he had done something similar earlier before, and it didn't warrant any kind of restriction. But now after the second time it happened. So those are some of the questions that I have in my mind.
Right.
Why,
Right. Well, the first one should have triggered something because that was yet again a wrong organ where he nipped and tried to take the adrenal gland and he took the part of the pancreas.
Yes, the
tail. Big thing, and the expectation, the bar's kind of low. I expect all surgeons to be familiar with anatomy and physiology.
Well, and I guess that's what I was trying to say earlier with my mechanic analogy. You know what I mean? You go to the doctor and if you're sick and you automatically expect you're going to know which organs, I'm complaining about or what body parts are which body parts. And my gosh. So going back to that first case, so these were this is the very first case that FDOH mentions in this emergency order suspending his license. And they said that this incident happened on May 12th of 2023. The patient's initials are GD, and it's a 50-year-old man. Same hospital, Ascension Sacred Heart, Emerald Coast. He was scheduled for an adrenalnectomy. I don't think I've said that exactly.
You did good. That's fine.
Okay. But he had a mass on his left adrenal gland. And y'all, that it's going to be serious when they have to add a line like this. Adrenal glands are small triangular glands located on the top of each kidney. You know what I'm saying? Like, that matters because this guy apparently didn't know that.
Right.
Like, that's why they feel like they have to make this distinction. It's almost like, see Jane run.
Right. Or it's like
see
a
Jane
neon
drop
sign
her
going,
scalpel.
This is it. To get this one.
Right.
It's a triangle.
Right. So during the surgery, Dr. Shaknovsky removed a portion of patient GD's pancreas instead of the adrenal gland. The pancreas is a large gland located behind the stomach and is surrounded by the gallbladder, liver, and spleen. He didn't even ever remove the adrenal gland, what he was supposed to be there to do. He just went and grabbed something else.
Right. And he here's his second part of his just whatever his motives are or what have you, modus operandi. And then he even documented that he removed the left adrenal gland. He documented that.
He knew what he was supposed to be doing.
Right. And so that's false documenting. That is very bad in medicine, because this is like when things keep going, the offense is bad, the cover-up's bad, the cover-up's bad, all the people involved in it's bad. It's like this is a FAFO, F around and find out, because it's where we are right now.
And that's what we see throughout this order, is that the sheer number of excuses that he's constantly making, and it's and the cover up. This isn't the first time, I mean, this incident's the first time, but in this incident and the second one, Mr. Bryan, he and we're going to get into those details in a second. That's the majority of what's in this report. So basically he documented, like you said, that he'd removed the adrenal gland. And it said at the time, Ascension did not have on-site pathologists, which is where he sent the tissue to be reviewed by a pathologist. Well, on May 15th, 2024, a pathologist reviewed the purported adrenal gland and determined that it was pancreatic tissue. So on May 16th, that's a typo that FDOH had. They say May 15th, 2024. It should have been 2023. So on or about May 16th, 2023, patient GD presented to Ascension with leakage and pain around his abdominal drain and vomiting. In response to the allegations, Dr. Shaknovsky claimed that the adrenal gland had migrated to a different part of the body. Sound familiar? If you listen to our last episode, this is exactly what he said about the liver that he removed from Mr. Bryan. So patient GD suffered from long-term permanent harm as a result of Dr. Shaknovsky's error, which he did not acknowledge and tried to cover up.
They still won't acknowledge it.
What in the world? Who says organs migrated? Again, I use this car analogy. I'm like, what if my mechanic came up to me and said, well, sorry, we couldn't fix your engine. It migrated to your trunk.
Yeah, it skipped to the back seat.
What in the world?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, what I'm looking at with all this is, where is peer review? Where is adverse event reporting where you can do it? You should be able to do it in a way where it's not punitive for you doing the right. Everybody in that room, the only goal you should have is making your patient better, like we say, first do no harm, and what is in the best interest of the patient, not Dr. Shaknovsky, not Ascension Sacred Heart, not this, not that, not the buddies that cluster up over there and say it's okay to label a spleen a liver, and a liver a spleen, and adrenal gland a pancreas, and we just do what we want. And then we're going to say a verb, it migrated, it jumped, it moved, it did whatever. That is so ridiculous.
It wore a mask.
It's ridiculous.
It had a name tag that said spleen.
What would be better? It should be better.
Right.
That if you do.
Unbelievable. So then that's just 14 points that they basically made on patient GD. And the rest of this 21-page report is devoted to Mr. Bryan's incident. And we learned a lot in this. Because, again, this is such an unbelievable story. I can just tell you that it went international, and it still continues to make news. Whenever we talk about this, people are interested in it because I think it is so unbelievable. But in this situation, there's so many questions. You're like, well, how could he do it? Was he sober? What are, and we don't know any of that.
Was he mad?
Was he mad?
Yeah.
Was he in a bad mood?
Fight with his wife.
Right. And now we're starting to see a pattern of behavior. And there's all these details that come out in the second part that basically talk more about, I would say, painting the picture of the environment of the OR, what you're getting at.
Yeah.
So, we all work with people that maybe are obnoxious, or maybe they're intimidating, maybe they're in a supervisor role, they're in a position of power over you as an employee. And so maybe sometimes people resent them in their attitude, or maybe they are fearful of them. Maybe there's this concern that they might get reprimanded or lose their job. And unfortunately, in the medical profession, there's so much at stake. It's one thing if I didn't like my boss as a journalist, if they were telling me to lie, I wouldn't do it. If they were telling me to make something up or report something bad about something, I would never do that. And I don't think anybody's necessarily asking somebody to do to take someone's life here. But after Shaknovsky took this man's life, after removing that liver by mistake, he did ask people to cover for him.
Right.
And that's the kind of situation where, I know the stakes are higher in medicine and it's still intimidating to have to speak up, but it does make you wonder, like, at what point did they say, knowing, and we're going to talk about that, they did know, they realized that he had taken out the wrong organ, but nobody really was like, hey, you took out the wrong organ. Yeah. There was just this appalling silence, really.
They've got sick at their stomachs.
That was the quote.
That was the quote. Well, and with all this, it's not in the patient's best interest, and there's always going to be people like this. That's why professions, like us, I can only talk about mine, in pharmacy, we have to have some stopgaps in the way that say, if you see something habitually happening, or it's just happening and you know it's wrong, there should be a way to report it without getting punishment or without getting retaliated against.
Like a whistleblower
Right,
type
sort of,
situation.
but not to that extent there,
Right.
because
Not as formal.
Right, a lot of us are walking around with big old anger issues that we can't resolve conflict in any other way but to go in and blow a horn and tell people I'm the best thing since banana pudding.
And we see that in a lot of the cases that we cover, in the murder cases.
We see it all the time. It's usually the criteria that puts us there.
That's right.
That's the person, that person acting like that. And through things, like I say, I always get my hope in these millennials and stuff, and these young people, because they're not as tied up in like things and having all this kind of stuff. They're tied up in feelings and doing the right thing. And I'm not saying that we're not, but they have ways to, if you're doing wrong and you think you ain't being recorded on someone's cell phone, you crazy.
That's true. I know. And it would be interesting to see if there's video of this actually.
I'm sure there is.
So let's get into this. This is facts involving patient WB, which, as we know, is Bill Bryan. This is according to Beverly and her attorney in Pensacola. So patient WB completed imaging, which revealed a suspected enlarged spleen and blood in the peritoneum with no active hemorrhage.
Yeah.
So that's important because they use that to say, you could bleed out if you go back to Alabama. They were pushing him to have surgery. His wife, Beverly, who's also a nurse, she didn't want to. They wanted to go back home to Muscle Shoals. She said they had an entire team waiting, ready to treat him. That's home. Those are her people. She knows those folks. They wanted to drive back, talking a 5-hour drive.
Yeah.
They told him not once, not twice, not 3 times. I think it was actually 3 times, maybe even 4 times, that they pressured him to stay and have that surgery. And finally they were like, yeah, you're bleeding and we don't want you to bleed out. You could bleed out and we don't want that to happen.
Right.
So that, to me, that line was important because they were basically saying there was no sign of any major hemorrhage.
Well, and that is, and in this report is well written.
It is.
You know, I almost thought you wrote it, but I did, because this is all the stuff. Because when they're pressuring him, they use that word, not mine. That he got pressured, and he said he declined surgical intervention and agreed to be admitted to the hospital for medication management. So when he's still in there, adjusting his meds and stuff, that happens a lot. And then they recommended it again. He declined yet again. And I want to go to Muscle Shoals. On the 3rd day, they continued to pressure. Dr. Shaknovsky pressured him. And he basically, the word they used is he relented. Now, to me, that's terrible. When somebody tells you no, damn it, they mean no.
That's
I don't
right.
like all this.
But they did the pressure like we talked about in the last episode about this. It's against medical advice, which sounds so ominous.
Yeah. Well, it sounds so threatening because really, okay, you're saying that. I'm going against it. It's really not that hard because I want to go home.
Right. And in defense of that, there are times when I'm sure that is a good recommendation. And you are trying to convince somebody, listen, this is my medical opinion. This could hurt you. Don't leave. Now, obviously, in hindsight, we realize this was not necessary. He could have made it to Muscle Shoals, it looks like. And ideally, he had a surgeon that knew where his liver was.
Right, ideally. But, I mean, basically, it's what it would be. And then just to keep on and on and on and to bring a closer in there, it's not like you're trying to sell me a 2025, Lexus over there. If I said no, I mean no. And they mean no. This is their body.
They teamed up on him.
And this is one thing that I have learned in pharmacy, and my dad even taught it to me in business. When people push back, there's something to it. There's really, even if you're like in our party store, a champagne fountain or something, if they're pushing back or say price or dates or whatever, listen to the person. People don't generally go around being pushbacks.
Right. So as we go through this, there's a lot of facts in here that we're reciting straight from what Florida Department of Health lists as facts. Pam and I are also going to give our opinion. We're going to talk a little bit about, how we're interpreting these. So I will make sure that we differentiate between what is facts and what we're suspecting is happening. But that was one of the things that went through my mind is, I did sort of, when I say that they brought in the closer, when they brought in the guy and teamed up on him, that's my opinion. But I do wonder, and this is my opinion as well, these are questions that I have, I should say, might be a better way to put it. Was it a decision about making money? Because as you read through this report, And it's right here, just a couple points down. Basically, they go ahead and schedule the surgery. Operating room OR staff members noted that Dr. Shaknovsky scheduled the splenectomy, and they were concerned with it being done so late in the day since they only had a skeletal crew. OR staff knew splenectomies were complicated procedures that could quickly deteriorate and were not regularly performed at Ascension. OR staff had concerns that Dr. Shaknovsky did not have the skill level to safely perform this procedure. And oh, how right they were.
Yeah, well, that should have been a hard stop right there.
So my questions, though, about that are like, okay, first of all, why aren't you performing splenectomies that often? And maybe it's just not a common thing to have happen. I don't know. But I'm just curious about that. And then also, how much do they cost? Did they have good insurance? Was this a money decision? You know, that's what goes through my mind. Was this a business decision? Were they saying, hey, we really don't want you to leave because we think it's in your best interest, or we really don't want you to leave because, gosh, that's a lucrative insurance you got there?
Well, we've kind of messed up in healthcare because we have messed up. Everything is a metric. Everything is a grade me on Facebook. Everything is this, that, and other. The people going to get the best grades on Facebook are the doctors that do everything you want them to do, that give you OxyContin or this, that, and the other. I know that's how it is in pharmacy because the feedback, most of the time the people that are maddest at me, are the ones that basically just don't understand OxyContin doesn't have a refill. You know, and they
don't they want one though?
And they're mad. They're so mad.
They're addicts,
and
probably.
then it goes on and on and on. But if you see somebody refilling OxyContin in your profession, that's not acceptable. It's just not acceptable. So I think that with the skeleton crew was one thing. They're not skilled at it. And that's one thing I ask with surgery. How many of these have you done? And basically, you just ask around about surgeons. But they're off base because they're down here away from Muscle Shoals.
Yeah, I know. That hurts my heart.
I know.
Well, and even when you ask around, you might not get the true story. You know, you go back to Dr. Brown. Those who aren't familiar, he's a plastic surgeon who's facing criminal charges for his wife's death, basically performing procedures on her in his office. But you know, people that went to him, he had a slew of patients that came forward and said that he basically botched their surgeries, and they had done their homework. They had gone to other people and asked, and Ben Brown had been recommended. So even if you do ask around, there's no guarantee that they're going to know what they're doing. But in this situation, God love them, you're right. They weren't in their hometown.
No, it was the home field advantage. But then basically he puts him under general anesthesia.
After showing up an hour late, by the way.
Right. It was supposed to start, at 4, and he came in at 5:20. That already, the vibe is already off. Think about it. You're in the operating room. He's not qualified.
They're already nervous about that.
Well, you got 2 or 3 people here and supposed to have 6 or whatever it is. I'm just making that up. And then
they're getting a splenectomy on their punch card.
Right.
They've never had one before.
Exactly. So, and here we are.
I don't know, but rare.
Yeah, here we go with that. And then he went and he was going to do the procedure laparoscopically, and then he decided, like mid-procedure, that he's going to do an open procedure because he couldn't see well.
So before we get into that, explain to people what laparoscopically is.
It's usually through a little incision through your abdomen.
Not as invasive, basically.
Right, and they just got a little light scope and can look on a screen. And it's called non-invasive. That's the main part.
Gotcha.
You know, because I'm not a surgeon, but I've had laparoscopic things before.
So it went from non-invasive to super duper invasive.
Right, it's open now.
Yeah.
All right, so we're late. We're not good at what we do, and we come in here, we're changing stuff midstream. That's kind of a no-no.
Which is exactly what he did. Now, I spoke to a woman who doesn't want me to use her name right now, but she had undergone a procedure by Dr. Shaknovsky, and without revealing too much because I'm keeping her confidence. But it was a situation where she was expecting the procedure to be done a certain way, very non-invasive, and it was the exact opposite.
Right.
And it was the similar sort of situation. He was like, oh, well, I needed to do it. There were unexpected things that happened. So he opened her up, and she woke up and was in intense pain and still experiences pain. She doesn't know that anything was bad or done wrong, but she certainly questions it now.
Right, definitely. Sort of like getting unexpected Brazilian butt lift from Dr. Ben Brown, right in mid-surgery. I mean, these people are playing loose and just fast and loose. But so basically converting to that open there, his colon was distended and there was blood in the abdomen.
I thought that was interesting. I do want to explain that a little bit because I looked it up when I was writing this for the Pensacola News Journal. They talk about a megacolon, that he had a megacolon. And basically that's like what you said, a distended colon, and it sort of emerged from his stomach. And so it obscured the visibility. It made it hard for him to see into the area that he needed to see in. And there's some blood in there too. So those two things are limiting visibility. I'm putting myself in his shoes. I'm thinking, gosh, if I can't see, then maybe I just want to wait for a second or whatever the problem solving measure may be. Well, that's not what this guy does.
No.
And this is where it just becomes even more unbelievable to me.
It's just when something starts to go wrong, the best thing to do is stop. So you don't do any further harm and try to fix it, correct it, say what's going on. Why would you not say, I'm in over my head here, get another surgeon, or I didn't expect this, or let's stop right here, because we hadn't cut anything just yet, except we've opened him up.
But now he's ready to. And this is, and FDOH makes a point of saying that Dr. Shaknovsky made no mention of this distended colon and these issues that he had with visibility in his operative report, because in his operative report, as we know, he basically still insisted that he thought it was the spleen and that he'd cut an artery that was attached to the spleen that was starting to bleed. So this is even before he started cutting. Basically, this caused some problems. He doesn't even acknowledge that this happened. He's still trying to stick in his operative report to the story that he removed the spleen. But here's what basically the state said is the difference between his account and what really happened and what the OR staff said. And it's dramatically, sadly, tragically, a different scenario. So basically, he says in his operative report that he converted to an open procedure. He identified the spleen and medical terms here, removed the gastrocolic
ligaments.
Yes. And then mobilized the spleen to expose other attachments, removed the splenoral and splenophrenic.
Yeah, the splenic artery and the vein from surrounding tissue.
Clearly, I am not a doctor.
Yeah, he dissected the spleen from the surrounding structures and dissected the splenic artery and the vein from surrounding tissues. Dr. Shaknovsky documented that he observed that the spleen was large and quite friable, which that means easy to bruise or irritate.
Fragile.
Yeah, sort of like brittle, like it could be brittle or just easy to manipulate. And that after dissecting the attachments, the spleen was, quote unquote, quite mobile.
Right. So this is his story.
And so he's sticking to it.
Yes. And during this portion of the dissection, Dr. Shaknovsky claims that he clamped a splenic artery aneurysm close to the spleen to avoid possible rupture. Well, y'all, that is not at all what happened. Because at this point in the procedure, he continued to document that he identified the splenic artery and appreciated the splenic artery aneurysm close to the splenic hilum. And he documented that he prepared to transect the artery, but just prior to achieving that, with the control of a stapling device, the aneurysm spontaneously ruptured, resulting in severe hemorrhage. So basically, in layman's terms, how I read that, and knowing now that he is not telling the truth in this report, basically he's saying, I cut an artery that actually exists next to the spleen. I was trying to do the right thing. I was using the stapling device and it just suddenly burst open. There's blood everywhere. Well, yeah, there's going to be blood everywhere when you hit a vein, the largest vein in the body. That's attached to the liver. It was none of these things.
No. And the thing is like, if you are a hammer, everything looks like a nail. You just see what you want to see.
Yeah.
He's got confirmation bias. I identify that as the spleen, and I'm even going to identify these arteries and ligaments and stuff as splenic. I mean, he doubled, tripled down on it. And I still find, I'm not a scrub nurse or a anesthesiologist or any of that stuff. I just find it hard that somebody just didn't even go, what the,
Well, I know, and part of me is thinking, well, did it all happen so quickly? I mean, there's no time stamp here. I know, and again, that's why I go back to it. I'm like, I know there's a different standard in medicine because so much more is on the line. But, is there such fear in an operating room? Is there so much intimidation? Is the doctor so revered or godlike or whatever? I mean...
Well, they already knew he was incompetent coming in. I mean, didn't they say that?
They did. They're like,
here, let's do surgery.
We don't be knowing about his skill level.
Let's cross our fingers, Lord.
Well, and then the state says that patient WB's, William Bryan's vitals began to decline as he hemorrhaged, and OR staff called the code. And Dr. Shaknovsky documented that during code, he packed the abdomen with sponges, was able to control the ruptured aneurysm with a surgical clamp, transected the splenic vein and artery, and removed the spleen from patient WB. Well, y'all, that ain't what happened.
It's not. I just wrote on my paper, what the F.
Yeah.
Feezy.
Nuh-uh is the big one, too. So, however, in a later interview, Dr. Shaknovsky claimed that he had never been able to control the aneurysm, but instead decided to complete the splenectomy in a last-ditch effort to control the bleeding after patient WB had already been in cardiac arrest for 50 minutes. We're going to get into more details, but basically, the OR staff is trying to save this man's life because he's bleeding out, and this dude is still in there cutting and trying to find what he's supposed to get.
And can't see. He's blindly doing all of it.
And that's exactly the word they use. Dr. Shaknovsky claimed that he fired the stapling device, quote unquote, blindly into the abdomen and removed an organ that he believed to be a spleen. I mean, hot damn.
Yeah, I know it. Well, I mean, that's where I'm like, I just
Is
don't
this
even
what
know.
you wanted?
Yeah.
Oh, no.
I'll
You
put it
can't put it back.
Yeah, and these are their words, not ours.
Yes.
This isn't a journalist that knows how to use the right words and verbs and move and this and that.
Right.
This is what the Department of Health said.
That's right. Pardon my mispronunciation of a lot of these things, but that's basically, this is their account of it. And then they go on to say that Dr. Shaknovsky claims that due to his shock and the chaos of the situation, he was unable to properly identify the organ he removed and assumed it must be the spleen. So I want to pause on that for a second. The chaos of the situation, you are the source of the chaos, sir. You could have controlled that. You could have stopped it at any time and said, my bad.
Right.
I didn't study up on this.
Right.
Google told me the liver was on the other side or whatever.
Yeah. Or either I'm tired or I don't care or I'm mad because I had to ask them 3 times, whatever. But also on this is what I'm talking about with people in healthcare. There's a lot to lose. If we're around somebody that's doing weird stuff or acting like they're a demigod and hurting people, we have an obligation as peers to at least report it, because they are the ones creating that chaos. And maybe they need some help. Maybe they need to be put on what's called a behavioral contract, where they have to go and learn how to calm themselves down or quit acting. You know what? I'm not going to jump in surgery and act like I know how to do it. I mean, you're kind of taught in life, like, well, if you got to go somewhere, act like you own the place or something like that. That's very different than acting like you're the surgeon and you have no clue what's going on.
I know. And we all hear about doctors with God complexes or perhaps being arrogant, so I don't know. I don't know Dr. Thomas Shaknovsky. I've not talked to anybody that's ever talked to him, but maybe those were some of his characteristics.
Well, I feel so sorry for Mr. Bryan and GD, and I feel sorry for Miss Beverly too. And then, but I'm like, he basically told all those people in the operating room, I don't care about him or them, and I don't care about you and your profession and all the years you put into studying and how you feel about a patient. I don't care about nobody.
Somebody give me that stapler. I'm going in blind.
Yep, I'm an hour and a half late. Here I am.
And what is a stapling device, by the way?
I don't even know there. I'm pretty sure it's something that puts like the little stitches type of thing or something like that.
It cuts too, apparently.
But whatever, the main thing is you're not supposed to be up there without a net.
Right. Well, exactly. And so as they continue to go on with Dr. Shaknovsky's account of what happened, they said he also claimed that the spleen, quote unquote, was grossly enlarged and deformed, and that the liver was in an unusual location, contributing to his misidentification. No, his hands were in the wrong spot.
I'm blaming this is a case of any and everybody but me.
Right. Not here, not me. Don't look over here. Dr. Shaknovsky's operative report contained deceptive and untrue statements that failed to accurately describe what occurred in the procedure. This is one of my favorite lines in this whole report coming up next. The witnesses in the OR consistently and clearly recounted a summary of events that is markedly more troublesome than Dr. Shaknovsky's written account of what occurred. In other words, he's a liar.
Yeah.
And it gets even better. I mean, when I say better, I just mean even more detailed.
He's Pinocchio Joe, and he's not ashamed to lie. He's ashamed to tell the truth. He just doubles down. Like I say, you're recruiting these people to be liars with you.
Yes. And as we go through the rest of that report, you're going to see this. According to witnesses in the OR, when patient WB's abdomen was opened, here we go, a megacolon burst out of the abdominal cavity, disrupting visibility. Gosh, I mean, that just sounds like a horrific scene for him.
It's probably a bad situation to be in, but you shouldn't have been fooling with that anyway.
Absolutely. And they do get into that. They're like, as a surgeon, one, you should be familiar with basic anatomy, and two, you should be able to handle problems when they arise. That's part of the deal, right? So Shaknovsky did not document that patient WB had a large and distended colon that disrupted visibility during the open procedure. While OR staff cleared the field by moving the large colon and suctioning blood, Dr. Shaknovsky identified a vessel that he intended to cut and noted that he could feel it pulsing under his finger. He told the staff member assisting him, quote unquote, "That's scary."
It is. It's scary. It's scary that this is why
it's scary that he continued on.
This recruiting he's doing, he's gaslighting them, brainwashing them, daring them basically. Say something, say something, say something. Gosh. You know, that's how he's being.
So Dr. Shaknovsky grabbed the vessel, positioned a surgical stapling device around it, and fired the stapler. Immediately after performing the dissection, patient WB began to severely hemorrhage and went into cardiac arrest. OR staff members observed a significant amount of blood pouring out, immediately disrupting visibility in the field. The operative staff tried to suction the blood and began an emergency blood transfusion protocol. The CRNA called a code and OR staff began performing CPR. While the staff worked the code, in other words, while they tried to save this man's life because he just cut the wrong thing, Dr. Shaknovsky stayed in patient WB's abdomen and continued dissecting, even though the abdomen was full of blood and there was no visibility. So he's just in there, I'm going to find it, I'm going to get it.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. Well, and isn't that interesting?
Like a hibachi chef.
Definitely. The CRNA had to call the code, and they were working to do whatever they could in the right way. You know, I mean, it's just like with Dr. Ben Brown. At least these folks here,
right?
You know, they're professionals, and they have been put in the worst situation, just like the patient.
It's awful. But yeah, they said that Dr. Shaknovsky did not ask for a clamp or cauterizer, which would be tools that you would use to try to stop the hemorrhaging. And they said he fired the stapling device blindly into patient WB's abdomen. Eventually, Dr. Shaknovsky removed a 2,106 gram liver, and then they give the measurements.
Yeah, 5 pounds.
Okay, a 5-pound liver from patient WB, and he identified it as a spleen. And then the FDOH has to make some clarifications here so that you understand, as those, meaning us that read it. A normal spleen is up to 12 centimeters long and weighs approximately 70 to 200 grams. An enlarged spleen can be up to 20 centimeters and weigh up to 400 and 500 grams. So basically, the difference is a 5-pound liver and a 1-pound spleen. And then this line, which it seems a shame that you even have to include this. Spleens and livers are anatomically distinct, have different consistencies, and are different colors. Additionally, the spleen is located on the left side of the abdomen, while the liver is on the right side.
Right. So here we go again. I keep pointing this out. This is the report from the Florida Department of Health. This is not us writing it. They have chosen to put anatomy and physiology lessons in this report.
That's crazy. I mean, it's so sad that was even necessary. And so sad for Mr. Bryan and, again, that other patient as well. So it says, continues on. The report says the staff looked at the readily identifiable liver on the table and were shocked when Dr. Shaknovsky told them it was a spleen. One staff member felt sick to their stomach. Despite the operative staff's best efforts, patient WB was unable to be resuscitated and was pronounced deceased. Dr. Shaknovsky told the staff that patient WB died from a ruptured splenic artery aneurysm. Dr. Shaknovsky requested that the organ be removed from the patient and labeled as a spleen and sent to pathology. The person responsible for labeling the specimen knew it was not a spleen, but did as they were instructed. After time of death was called, Dr. Shaknovsky left the operating room. He returned to the operating room 3 times after that. Each time Dr. Shaknovsky returned to the operating room, he stated that patient WB's splenic artery aneurysm ruptured, and that was what caused the bleeding. The staff in the room felt that Dr. Shaknovsky was attempting to convince them that this is what occurred, even though they witnessed something different.
Right. Brainwashing, gaslighting, intimidation, bullying. Okay, I just labeled spleen. Okay, so I'm just making a label spleen, and I just go put it on something and send it down there and think the pathologist is just going to go by what I called it.
Well, I know, and it almost reminds me because I'm not making light of this at all, but it's almost as silly and basic as those shows I watched as a kid, whether it was Sesame Street or Electric Company, basically where you have fruits that dance around as different things. I'm a grape. I'm an apple. I'm an orange. And there were some that were health related. I'm the heart. I'm the stomach. You know, I mean,
it's basic.
My gosh.
It's just so basic, but I mean, people will say, well, people make mistakes all the time. These are too costly to make mistakes. The error margin is zero. That's where we're at. And the thing is, even if something was going south, he had many times to abort the mission.
Right.
Many
the
times.
megacolon bursting out could have been a good stopping
exactly.
point.
Or if you were a good steward of your staff and cared what they thought, everybody in there has intelligence. They may even be smarter than he is,
Well, and you wonder if it ever did occur to him. I mean, I get that he's lying and doubling down, and we're going to talk even a little bit more about that. But like, was there ever anything in his mind that like, gosh, maybe this isn't right. Maybe I should slow down. Maybe I shouldn't do this.
Yeah, I think maybe, but I think before, people do what works for them. I think before he's been that pushy person, or if you come in, it's just like we talk about with other things. When people use anger and bullying and intimidation, we all feign back, and then we lose our mind, and just think, well, I don't even want to get close to him. This is too important for that. People with those kind of personalities should not be in positions that they don't have someone over them if they can't do any better than this.
Yeah, that's terrifying. Well, the report continues that the third time Dr. Shaknovsky returned to the room, he asked if someone measured the spleen, in quotes. The specimen had not been measured. Dr. Shaknovsky requested to go to pathology to view the specimen. Yeah, that doesn't sound guilty.
Yeah.
I doubt he goes to pathology all the time after every surgery, but I mean, I don't know.
Yeah, well, this is a mission to go continue Operation Gaslight.
Absolutely. Dr. Shaknovsky, in my opinion, I agree with you. Dr. Shaknovsky viewed the specimen and claims that at that time, he still assumed it was a spleen, or maybe he was just keeping his fingers crossed that it was.
You're a hammer. Everything's a nail.
A pathologist reviewed the specimen and confirmed that it was an intact liver. Patient WB underwent an autopsy. During the autopsy, the medical examiner observed that patient WB's spleen and its attachments were untouched and in the normal position. His liver was missing, and his inferior vena cava, I'm not sure if I'm saying vena cava, has been severed. Additionally, the medical examiner noted that there was no evidence of a ruptured splenic artery aneurysm. The vena cava is the largest vein in the body and brings deoxygenated blood from the body back to the heart for new oxygen. The inferior vena cava connects the liver to the heart. And based on these findings, Dr. Shaknovsky dissected patient WB's inferior vena cava, resulting in the bleeding event that precipitated his death. And in fact, the medical examiner, Dr. Deanna Oleski, determined that his death was homicide because he wouldn't have died but for the fact that his liver got yanked out.
Right. And
bless him.
The cause is taking out the wrong organ. And
so as the report continues, we're going to keep reading it, but basically the rest of it documents how he tried to cover up the laws specifically that he violated, why they were violated, how they were violated. We've told you the story through what FDOH basically said happened, and the rest of the report is basically justifying why they believe his license needs to be suspended.
Yeah. Well, look right here at the statutes. It's like the legislature recognizes that the practice of osteopathic medicine is potentially dangerous to the public if conducted by unsafe and incompetent practitioners. Okay. Then it says some more stuff about the general public and being helped. The state that each osteopathic physician has to meet, and here's the word, minimum requirements. Just minimum requirements.
Where's the liver?
I'm pretty sure that's it. For safe and effective practice, it is the legislative intent that osteopathic physicians who fall below the minimum competency or are otherwise present a danger to the public shall be prohibited from practicing in the state of Florida here. And that's where I think this statute is what should empower peers and coworkers and people helping with the surgery, the nurses, other doctors, other healthcare professionals. This, if you're incompetent, they're practicing incompetently, or he's not even minimally safe.
No. No. So the report continues to say, in the course of their practice, osteopathic physicians, which is what Dr. Shaknovsky is, that they are responsible for performing medical procedures in a manner that is correct and safe. General surgery is a complicated specialty that requires an intimate understanding of a patient's anatomy, including an ability to problem solve when faced with unexpected findings, events, or emergencies, i.e. megacolons. When a patient is under general anesthesia, it is the surgeon's ultimate responsibility to maintain maintain control of the operating room and navigate the team through any unforeseen circumstances. Any lapse in judgment can result in severe patient injury, even death. Osteopathic physicians must be able to think clearly and rationally during an emergency. In the event of an adverse incident, it is important for osteopathic physicians to accurately document and record everything that occurred. Well, FDOH goes on to say he did not do that.
Right. Well, and here's the thing, everything going south there, if you're the cause of the chaos, you know, that should be a clue there. I mean, basically a lapse in judgment. They're just saying the same thing over and over again with different words there. And like I said, the sad part of this is nobody's empowered to tell the truth and for the patient's best interests.
Well, and they get into the first incident. Dr. Shaknovsky erroneously removed a portion of patient GD's pancreas during an adrenalectomy and patient WB's entire liver during a splenectomy. Patient GD was permanently harmed and patient WB died. Dr. Shaknovsky has denied wrongdoing and claimed that the patient's organs, quote unquote, migrated to an unusual place in the body or presented with abnormal anatomy. Dr. Shaknovsky's failure to admit his error illustrates either his lack of clinical appreciation for what occurred during the procedures and or his lack of integrity. And to me, that sentence is another one of my favorites in this report because I feel like it sums up everything.
Right. Well, they're like, we see you. We know what you did. And I mean, you're going to double, triple, quadruple down that intact liver that everybody else can easily identify is a migrating, dancing around spleen.
Right. And he's got to keep coming back in the operating room to remind everybody, hey, you know that surgery we just did? You know, the one where the guy just died? By the way, that was the splenectomy. You know?
Because I said so.
So he says, the report says Dr. Shaknovsky's repeated egregious surgical errors resulting in significant patient harm, coupled with his failure to take responsibility for these errors, indicates that his reckless conduct is likely to continue.
Doesn't egregious mean like shocking?
Yeah, out of the norm.
Yeah.
Dr. Shaknovsky's continued practice as an osteopathic physician presents an immediate, serious danger to the health, welfare, and safety of the public. The department considered various restrictions on Dr. Shaknovsky's practice, short of a summary suspension, but found that due to the scope and severity of the issues with Dr. Shaknovsky's treatment of the patients in this order, these restrictions would be inadequate to protect the public.
So they're telling you right there, we tried to look at it sideways and through my left eye and everything to try to make a way for him, but this is so bad, we can't even do that.
I know. It's tragic. And it said, additionally, Dr. Shaknovsky's misidentification of the liver was not a momentary misidentification. Momentary misidentification. He had multiple times he could have stopped before then, in my opinion.
Yeah.
Despite converting to an open procedure to increase visibility, he dissected the liver, cutting the individual attachments to the abdomen. Each attachment that was severed was another opportunity for Dr. Shaknovsky to recognize that he was handling the completely wrong organ due to the anatomical differences between spleens and livers. Liver dissection is complicated and time-intensive. Despite having ample opportunity to realize his mistake and keep looking for the spleen, Dr. Shaknovsky failed to do so. Therefore, any restriction tailored to protect the public must also include a complete restriction from performing general surgery.
So what that says is that was should have been a timely and pretty complicated surgery, but not for old Dr. Shak. He's just like, I'm just going to pull this out.
Right. And then, like I said, I'm with you on this. I feel like this report really addresses everything. And they go into, however, even this restriction would not address Dr. Shaknovsky's egregious conduct of fabricating medical records. Remember, he talked about how he put in sponges when he was still claiming it was that artery that burst. He never put in sponges, never addressed that the megacolon burst. You know, so he's basically making stuff up. And again, why would you do that when you have all these witnesses? There's more to this.
Because it's worked for him before.
Yeah. I know. And I feel, and I'm not blaming the staff at all. I just feel like there's got to be, what is this guy's personality that nobody wants to speak up and be like, mofo.
Right. Well, they're going to tell their story because they're going to have to, because they have licenses that hang in the balance.
Well, the one that labeled it a spleen when it was clearly a liver. Like, why?
Yeah.
I don't blame him. I'm not saying.
Like, he's obviously done something before that scared them.
That's what I'm thinking.
And he's probably threatened them or holds their, you know, when you're holding somebody's paycheck and their livelihood and everything they went to school for because you just want to run the room, you know,
Right. I know. It does make you wonder about the hierarchy in a medical situation. The other staff in the OR knew it was not a spleen. Dr. Shaknovsky even went to pathology after the surgery to look at the organ again after the quote unquote chaos of the surgery was over. At this point, he should have created an operative report that detailed his mistake. However, he took this deception a step further by describing the removal of the spleen in the operative report with great detail, identifying that he dissected specific structures and ligaments that were never touched. Dr. Shaknovsky purposely identified the source of the significant bleed as a ruptured splenic artery aneurysm and attempted to convince the OR staff that this is what caused the hemorrhage. However, the medical examiner found no evidence of a ruptured aneurysm. There was no other explanation for this than Dr. Shaknovsky attempting to avoid blame for severing a significant vessel. This level of dishonesty and fraud is incompatible with the level of integrity that is necessary to be able to practice safely as an osteopathic physician.
Mm-hmm. And this next one, it is a privilege to be licensed to practice as an osteopathic physician. It's a privilege to be anything in healthcare because people trust us. They trust us inherently.
Yes.
You know, because I look at my doctors and I know people, if I hand them a bottle, basically a lot of them, not everybody, because I like when a person's their own advocate, they just do it.
Mm-hmm.
You have it's kind of very humbling to know, whoa, you know, you better keep your game up.
Mm-hmm.
They're counting on you.
Right. First, do no harm.
Mm-hmm.
And they do. They go on to say it's a privilege to be a doctor and that Dr. Shaknovsky's blatant disregard for the truth, falsification of an operative report, and attempt to convince OR staff to acquiesce to his version of events is a breach of the public trust. Dr. Shaknovsky's dishonesty cannot be contained to only operative reports. It colors every aspect of the practice of osteopathic medicine. The public must be able to trust that Dr. Shaknovsky's description of patient care, whether that is in an emergency room clinic or primary care practice, is true. Mm-hmm. That trust is irrevocably broken. Therefore, there is no restriction that can adequately protect the public from an osteopathic physician who is willing to lie and pressure others to lie on their behalf. Based on the foregoing, there are no less restrictive means other than the terms of this order that will adequately protect the public from Dr. Shaknovsky's continued practice as an osteopathic physician.
Yep. And that sentence there, that the trust is it's broken forever.
Yes.
There's no fixing that.
Yes. No, I know. And then they go on to give the specific statutes and how he violated those, underlining essentially
I think it's
everything that we've talked about.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
No.
I think it's interesting how they keep calling this wrong site, wrong organ. You know, it's something that there should be something. If he's not that competent, which we don't have to worry about that anymore, he's got an emergency suspension. He's not revoked yet, but he has a suspension.
Yes.
You know, so there's maybe like they went around and found some special conditions for Ben Brown. There's nothing special other than he's going to have like a daddy surgeon over him or something, you know?
Well, and I think it's interesting because, you know, Ben Brown, plastic surgeon, is facing criminal charges as well as an emergency restriction on his license. Mm-hmm. He can only practice in a state licensed facility under the supervision of a state licensed doctor, but he's also facing a criminal investigation mm-hmm. for the death of his wife. Yeah. And the Walton County Sheriff's Office, which is the county where this surgery took place in Miramar, Destin area, they're investigating him as well. Mm-hmm. And they say it's a complicated case. Basically, they're going to take their time. They'll let us know as soon as something's, I guess they come to a decision. But I think that's also the day and age that we live in now. It's not enough to just say, oops, I made a mm-hmm, mistake. Mm-hmm. When your error is so egregious and you lie about it and you try to get others to lie about it and you're so, and I use the word incompetent because that's what it appears to be, mm-hmm. or ignorant at the very least, mm-hmm. that you would cost someone their life. You know, it's almost like what we've seen in law enforcement mm-hmm. in recent cases mm-hmm. in recent years. What with George Floyd, mm-hmm. the officers that were involved in his death, they ended up getting criminal charges against them and some sentenced to prison. And I feel like this is essentially what we're seeing now. There's going to be more accountability in these various professions when there's just this egregious and blatant disregard mm-hmm. for the rules, right. for what they're supposed to be doing.
Decency. I mean, just decency. You know, what I think about is when he's in there operating, I'm like, what's his mindset? What's going through his mind? He's obviously under duress and in over his head. And I would think that someone that cared about this person right here would say, help me, get someone else to help me. I'm in over my head, but there's just something about not being able to admit that. And I have learned through being a pharmacist 37 years is that people, when they come in, and there are misfeels in pharmacy, just like there are things that happen here, but we have a lot of stopgaps in the way. Most people want you to be honorable and at least admit it and at least have some empathy and some compassion, because when people push back, there's something to it. And there was a case where it was one of the big chains. The pharmacist had given a 10 milligram Coumadin on a baby. This is back in the day, and it should have been 1 milligram. Well, the baby hemorrhaged to death, and nobody, the big company he worked for, would not let this man say, "I'm sorry." And he was sorry.
For liability reasons.
He lost his license. He tortured himself. He couldn't even look at his own child who was that age, and it just ate his lunch,
Bless him.
So the thing is, we are all people. It very well could be you laying there, me laying there, Dr. Shack laying there.
Right. Well, and that's just it too. Obviously social media, I've posted this on my Facebook business page, the stories that I've covered about Dr. Shaknovsky. And some of the comments were interesting. I think a lot of people felt like you and I do. It's natural. Like the natural inclination is like, WTF, how does this even happen? My God, it's basic anatomy. Like the game operation, like, wrong one.
Yeah.
But then there were a couple people that were like, well, I really feel sorry for him. I'm sure he didn't mean to do it. And that kind of irritates me because I feel like it minimizes the death of the person, of the patient. Because you don't know that. And maybe he does feel bad. Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying he's a monster and he's heartless and was happy to do it. I don't know that. I assume that's not the case. But I do wonder, like, when you read this order, he did have multiple opportunities to admit his mistake. And instead, he doubled and tripled down, like you said, to cover it up and even tried to get other people to do it. That doesn't smack of someone to me that's like super sorry.
Right. And that doesn't smack of that's the first time someone's done that. This recruiting, and this is how I do it, and I do what I do, and you shut up about it, And this ain't the first time. We already see that in this report here.
Patient GD.
Yeah, he set the tone for all this. This was bound to happen. It's bound. Something worse will happen if he just keeps on.
Well, and it's interesting too, because the last time we talked about this was when it first happened, and it was right after the death of Mr. Bryan. And the state, if you were to go to the state of Florida, the Florida Department of Health's website, his license basically said was no disciplinary action. His license is clear. And that was a follow-up story that I had done, basically explaining how the Florida Department of Health works. And I got an unsolicited call from their communications director, which I was thankful. It was good to talk to this person. I had reached out multiple times when I first started looking into Dr. Ben Brown's case. I had not been successful in reaching anyone. So I do feel like, good, there's a connection now that hopefully, God forbid, there's other similar cases like this should happen, that maybe we can get some answers. But I do feel like when it comes to the public trust, they do want to know how the process works. And this guy did have something that had happened similar before, but you have to work the website and go to the fine print to find that this little incident that happened last year ever happened. And the whole complaint process is multi-layer. And as you know, because you were there when I got the call, I got a 30-minute civic lesson.
Yeah, we both did.
And how the Florida Department of Health came about and how it works and who they answer to. And basically, they're under the governor. So Ron DeSantis, thanks for the order.
Yeah.
Well,
I'll tell you one thing. Yeah, we did see that. If anything is too cumbersome for an average person with average intelligence to kind of navigate, it's too difficult, because I was looking at the flow chart that we were given by him, and I'm like, the only thing they left off is the trash can, where I feel like a lot of them just go. But I will give them credit on this one.
Definitely.
They got around to getting this one way longer than they did with Ben Brown.
Yeah, and this is solid. This is interesting to me. You know, it definitely, whether I'm, Beverly Bryan or just a patient in Florida, which is what we are. We live in Florida, and my doctors are in Florida, so I consider myself a Florida patient, if you will. This is reassuring. This makes me feel like you are on top of it. You are paying attention. There is a way to get to it. You're not covering it.
Right.
And that's not to say that a lot of times when we talk about this, and especially with Ben Brown, when we're saying, where are you, Florida Department of Health? What's going on? You have all these patients that are complaining. I get you have your processes, but if the average person, and I consider myself an average person, doesn't understand your processes, if they're not that transparent, whatever your rules and regulations, and you may have the best of intentions, but how are we supposed to know?
Yeah. Well, the worst thing that can happen to someone is they can get killed. I mean,
Right.
so I don't buy the flow chart and all that stuff. There are some things, and this word clearly says it in here. This is an emergency suspension that we can no longer hold back, and there's so many reasons why. And he keeps doubling down on it and stuff that it's almost embarrassing if they don't do it.
Right.
You know?
Right. That's exactly right. Well, we'll see if they do permanently revoke his license.
Mhm.
And I imagine there's going to be more to come on Dr. Shaknovsky.
Mhm.
So, from what
Sure.
I understand, they're taking a look at other cases in the
Mhm.
past as
Right.
well.
Well, we just condolences to Miss Beverly and her family,
Yes.
and we hope the other patient, GD, is doing well.
Yes, yes. Well, Pam, thank you so much for joining me on this and
You're welcome.
sharing your knowledge as well. And again, forgive me for, mispronouncing some of these medical terms, but if you would like to read the report for yourself, you can go to the Florida Department of Health's website. You can look up his name and you'll see it in the discipline box, basically. And it's not the easiest thing in the world to navigate, but it's not impossible.
Yeah.
Just take a minute.
You can
to
do
kinda- Yeah, you can do it. So anyway, thanks so much for joining me, Pam. We appreciate you joining us. That is it for Surgeon Loses License After Removing Man's Liver Instead of Spleen. Dr. Thomas Shaknovsky blames mistake on migrating organ. We appreciate you joining us on Gulf Coast Confidential. I'm your host, writer, and producer, Molly Barrows. Thankfully, with researcher and co-host Pam Hill. And a big thanks, as always, to our director, editor, and production engineer, James Roy. Remember, you can listen to more of our Gulf Coast Confidential conversations wherever you listen to your favorite podcast. And don't forget, you can always watch us on the Gulf Coast Confidential YouTube channel. Just don't forget to like and subscribe, and we'll see you next time.